Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well. In Book 2 of Cicero's On the Nature of the Gods, we are going to see Balbus making a fairly extended argument for the existence of God or gods that we can call an argument from the degrees of being. So there's a metaphysics that is assumed here that's at work, one that probably modern and late modern philosophers are a little bit less receptive to, but was very common in the ancient world. And I think that when we talk about degrees, which is gradus of being, a lot of people, if they know much about the history of philosophy, will typically associate that with Platonism. And you might say, well, Balbus is a Stoic, he's not a Platonist, why is he bringing up this argument? As it turns out, the Stoics also thought that there were degrees of being. It was quite a common idea throughout antiquity. So it's not an exclusively Platonic conception. And the arrangement that we're going to see is not unique to the Stoics or even the Platonists. We see a lot of other thinkers invoking things like this. And it goes on all the way into the medieval period as well. So there's really three lines of argumentation, all of which are using the same basic schema or arrangement of four different degrees of being, of beings, we could say, right? Each of which is more complicated, more rich, and in a certain respect more real than the ones beneath it. And we actually begin from something that's even lower than those. So the section begins, if we wish to proceed from the first rudimentary orders of being, primus inchoatisque naturis, right? So the first degree, which we're going to see is actually plants, that's not the very, very beginning basis, because we have this term here of, inchoatus, right, or rudimentary. So that we could call bare being. The being, for example, of a stone, something that doesn't have any sort of life at all. So he begins from that, and then he goes up the ladder or the hierarchy of degrees. So the first argument goes like this. We notice the sustaining power of nature first in the members of the vegetable kingdom, in plants. And of course we could say, well, we know more about nature now. There's also fungi, and where do they fit in? They're not plants. Don't worry about that. Just think about the way that people conceptualized this hundreds of years ago, and you won't get into any trouble that way. So we have plants, and plants are going to do certain things. So they have nurture, alendo. They take in some sort of nourishment of some kind, air, water, certain minerals, and then they have growth, right? And that's part of plants. They go through an entire cycle. We could add other things, sexual reproduction, but we don't need to get into the weeds too far with that. Plants basically stay in the same spot unless they're like seeds getting blown around. and they eat in some sort of way, they grow in some sort of way, and that's basically it. They don't think about stuff. They don't respond to their environment in the way that animals do. And so then we go to the second grade, the second degree, animals. And by this, we don't mean all of the animals, because we're also animals. We mean all the non-rational animals, what they often call the brute creatures. So, upon the animals nature bestowed sensation, sensum, now we've got something that's more complex, right? Movement, really a big game changer there, motum. And then something that Cicero is calling, ad petu, which could be translated as appetite or impulse. And this is an appetite or impulse to approach things that are good for it and to retreat from things that are harmful. Okay, so that's, part of what it means to be an animal. Everything from rudimentary forms like oysters all the way through insects up to the higher forms of animals. Then we move to the third degree, and that's us human beings. For man, nature added to her gift by giving the human being reason. And interestingly, Cicero is going to have Balbus say, and this is typical of not just the Stoics, but other ancient schools, we have reason and we can use that reason to control the impulse or appetite and, to alternately indulge it and hold it in check. Obviously, we can use reason for all sorts of other things as well. That's the main thing that's being talked about in this course of the argument. And then we have the fourth and highest grade. So these things we can observe within the world, but we know that, or we think that, there must be something better as we're going up the ladder of being, better than us. So what do we have here? The fourth and highest grade is that of beings born by nature good and wise, and endowed from the outset with innate attributes of not just reason, but right reason. Reason that doesn't go astray. Our reasoning, which we're, good at sometimes, often does go astray. We can think about, for example, what is it that I actually desire? What would be the means to satisfy that desire? And then it turns out we misjudge the means. We prioritize in the wrong way. We screw up, right? We engage in inferences, and it turns out that we made a mistake in our reasoning processes. Well, the fourth degree, they have right reason, so they don't screw up. And it's translated here, right reason and consistency, but really, constansque could be modifying reason. It's reason that doesn't ever go the wrong way. It is consistent. And Balbus says this must be held to be above the level of human beings. This is the attribute of God, that is of the world, which has to possess that perfect and absolute reason of which I spoke. So this is less of an argument so far and more of an account, an explanation, right? The next line of discussion says it's undeniable so it's translated here as organic whole, institutio rerum. So every system, every thing that is composed of other things in a complex way must have some sort of ideal, it's being translated here, of perfection, aliquid extremum atque perfectum. So some sort of being brought to its best level. So he starts with plants and animals. He says, as in vines or cattle, we see that unless they're obstructed by some force, nature progresses on a certain path of her own to her goal of full development. So, plants, unless something screws them up, they land on bad soil or it doesn't rain enough, they will do these things. Likewise, animals. So they will reach their level. But a plant is never going to be able to do what it is that something at a higher level can do. It's not going to develop motion. It's not going to develop rationality. It's not going to develop wisdom or anything like that. Animals, more to work with, right? More ways of perfecting things, more ways of going wrong, but they're not going to develop rationality, let alone right rationality or anything like that. So going on, he's going to talk about in painting, architecture, and other arts and crafts, there's an ideal of perfect workmanship, even so, and far more in the world of nature as a whole. So now we're going up to the fourth degree, right? There must be a process towards completeness and perfection. So the lower modes of being can encounter many external obstacles to hinder their perfect realization, but nothing can frustrate nature as a whole. Nothing can actually stand in the way of the beings of this fourth degree, this highest grade. So he says, nature embraces and contains within herself all the different modes of being, cohibit et continet, right? And then he concludes something. Hence, it follows there must exist this fourth and highest grade unassailable by any external force, right? And so this is going to lead him to a further inference. It follows of necessity the world is an intelligent being and indeed a wise being. So there we actually have something like an argument that there must be this highest grade, gradus, or degree of being. And then finally, we get another additional discussion. So what can be more illogical, it's translated as here, silly, than to deny that the being which embraces all things must be the best of all things, or admitting this to deny it must have first life, like plants, and then what else? It must be rational and intelligent, so we're kind of jumping over the animals. And lastly, endowed with wisdom. If it resembles plants or animals, and remember that we're animals, it must be reckoned lower in the scale of being. So that gets you a certain way. You could say, well, but it does resemble us. We're rational. It's rational. But there's a very important difference, one that we registered at the beginning. So if it's capable of reason but has not been wise from the beginning, then the world, the fourth grade of being, must be in a worse condition than human beings. For a human being can become wise, but if in all of the eternity of past time the world has been foolish, it's never going to attain wisdom, and so it would be inferior to us. We would actually be the highest grade of being in that case, which is absurd. Quod quoniam absurdum est. Therefore, so here's the conclusion, the world must have been wise from the beginning and divine. So the world is this highest grade of being that we call God, right? Now, the Stoics, this argument is presuming their particular cosmology or theology, which is pantheistic. Probably not going to be a version of this argument that, say, Jews or Christians who believe in a transcendent creator God is going to be able to get behind. But you will find in later Jewish and Christian thinkers arguments drawn from degrees of being that follow more or less the same trajectory, saying that there must be some highest level of being that surpasses us, but which we have something in common with, our rationality. It's just that our rationality is not a perfected one, unless somebody happens to be a sage. We don't know whether there are any or not. Whereas at the highest level, that rationality is indeed perfected and has always been perfected. It is at the highest level. So this is another argument for the existence of God or the gods, some sort of divinity that the Stoics were making, that Cicero is putting into the mouth of his Stoic interlocutor here in this work.